comment and a question. My comment is a cautionary note. You seem quite ready to make conclusions based on what's not going to happen, what ain't going to happen in the future. And I, like you, am a political scientist, and the same types of comments took place about South African apartheid when Nelson Mandela was sentenced to life in prison and was internationally identified as a terrorist. And South African apartheid fell, and the same types of arguments were stated about white South Africans being unwilling to negotiate one man, one vote, et cetera, et cetera. Similarly, I'm old enough to have been trained in the politics of the Cold War, which was considered a permanent division in the global structure. And I was teaching courses at the time that the Berlin Wall was falling and found that I had absolutely no textbooks to be able to even, discuss it, let alone predict it. So those of us who are political scientists who are still surviving had to give up on the question of it ain't gonna happen in the future. And so the cautionary note is that I think we should assume that it is reasonable to fully normalize relations internationally with the state of Israel or whatever state will replace it, and it demands at minimal recognizing international law, which means recognizing the law of return for Palestinians, and we will face those consequences when they get here. I'm also a member of an organization called Not in Our Name, Jews Against Israel's Wars, which is an anti-Zionist Jewish organization, and I'm not alone in saying that there are many of us who know that we have a right to live in the land of Israel that many of us have no connection with at all, and we have Palestinian brothers and sisters who don't have the right to return, and if it were possible, we would gladly give up our so-called right of return so that all of our Palestinian brothers and sisters could return to the lands of their parents and their grandparents. So my question for you is, I mean, you do an admirable, sort of deconstruction of the Israel lobby, but what's missing seems to me to be another force, which is the force of the Palestinians themselves. The resistance movement, the Intifada, the force of resistance movements in general in American foreign policy, the Vietnam movement, the resistance movement in Iraq and Afghanistan, because you're right to say that it's not happening the way it was planned. But I don't think that's only because of what happened in the United States, because of any Americans, whether they're Jewish, Christian, at all. I think there's a lot to be said for the case of national liberation movements and anti-imperialism, and those of us who are here, whether we're part of a lobby or not, if we look to international solidarity movements, we've been actually able to shape American and Canadian foreign policy substantially by connecting ourselves with those types of forces. So I wonder what you think about sort of the lobby from below.
Look, I don't see much evidence in the United States at this point in time that there are forces that are able or willing to challenge the lobby's influence on Middle East policy in any meaningful way. As a number of people have heard me say at other venues here in Canada and in Europe and in the United States, what strikes Steve and me the most about our experience is how few people have stood up to defend us. I would also point out to you that if you look at what happened to Jimmy Carter was savaged by the lobby, and hardly anyone in the United States stood up to defend Jimmy Carter. Most people run scared on this issue. So at this point in time, the lobby is almost without serious opposition in the United States. We wrote this book in large part to hopefully change that. Your general point on your comment is that you were sort of saying that we seem to think that nothing can ever change, that this is all hopeless. We wouldn't have written the book, and I wouldn't be here talking to you and going all over the world talking to people if I thought the situation was hopeless. I don't think the situation is hopeless. I don't think it's hopeless for two reasons. One, I agree with you that individuals like us do matter. I believe we have agency. We can affect what's going on. I think that, the committee, the CJPME, is doing very important work to bring a just solution. So I'm not arguing that we don't matter, but I am somewhat depressed about the present situation. especially in the United States, which I know very well. But I think over the long term it can change. And the other reason I think it can change, and I think I'm more in agreement than disagreement with you, I don't think that creating an apartheid state, and I said this, is a viable long-term solution. I think the Israelis are basically driving the train or driving the car off a cliff. This is a disastrous policy for them. This was the point that I tried to make in my presentation. So over the long term, there will be change. I think there's no question about it.